Awesome. Thank you all for joining. I'm so happy that you're all here. I think I don't need to introduce myself. No, I know everybody. I'd like to invite any interruptions, comments, chat, anything you have to share, any questions that you have throughout this whole presentation about the teaching portfolio. I welcome interruptions, so please do. I want to make this as useful to you as possible as we go. And so don't feel like you need to kind of save questions for the end or anything like that. We're going to talk about how to create a teaching portfolio. And the structure of this talk is going to start with telling you what it is. What is a teaching portfolio? Then we'll chat a bit about like why you would even want a teaching portfolio, and hopefully have a little bit of kind of pros and cons of putting together a teaching portfolio. And as we go through this, I think I have 5 pieces of practical tips and practical advice to share. And that'll kind of be the structure and the agenda for the next 43 minutes here. So what is a teaching portfolio? Before I ask you why you would want a teaching portfolio, I want to at least make sure that we're on the same page for what is a teaching portfolio. So a teaching portfolio is a document. It's usually in the format of like a Word document or a PDF or something like that. In the past, it would be like a big thing printed out or in a binder. If you've seen like old time pictures of teaching portfolios, it's like big stacks of paper on a shelf. But nowadays, it's an electronic document. And the goal of this document is to summarize, highlight, and provide evidence for everything that relates to teaching, specifically around what you've accomplished as a teacher, your experience as a teacher, your strengths and areas of growth and development as a teacher. And the word teacher is broadly defined. So it can be teaching colleagues, students, residents, fellows, CME teaching. So kind of teaching writ large, as you might think of it in the setting of academic medicine. So it's that evidence for teaching, and then it's not just the quantity of teaching that you do, but also evidence of proficiency. If you've done anything innovative in teaching, it's evidence of innovation. It's also evidence of scholarship, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes as well. And then I think the final important thing from my perspective, as we kind of segue to why you would do this, it's really an opportunity to reflect on your career or your identity as a teacher, and to recognize accomplishments, not other people's accomplishments, but your accomplishments as a teacher. So that's my synopsis of what is a teaching portfolio. Does anyone have anything to add to this in terms of what it is, or any questions about like what is a teaching portfolio? This would be a really good time to kind of ask, make sure we're on the same page. I'll do some more clicking here because, oh, there we go. Now I can see everyone. Neha, anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like it's a nice place to kind of control the narrative or like share the story arc of your work. And a lot of our work as teachers is not actually best showcased in a line by line CV. So it adds color and dimension to how you spend your time.
I like that. Yeah, definitely. Color and dimension. So why? This is an unsplash picture of someone this is someone who's been on medicine, direct care for a week and then off for a week and is doing a million other things. And then it's like, oh, and I have to have a teaching portfolio. Why? So maybe let's start with this. Who has a teaching portfolio? Can you, either unmute and shout, or you can use like one of those emojis? No one. Okay, no one here has it. Neha, do you have you must have a teaching portfolio, right?
Yeah, I just have delayed reactions. I was trying to find the hand raise.
Oh, you're trying to find the reaction for, okay.
Yeah.
So Neha has one, no one else has one. Any ideas based on what I just described this thing is, any ideas for why you would want to create this document? And I'll give you some ideas on the next slide for why I think you may want to, but I'm curious if anyone has any ideas.
I'm just going to hop in because I kind
Yeah.
of lied. Like I have one file in my Outlook that I put a thank you letter from um, Whitney for giving a talk with the interns in July, right? So I feel like it's maybe where I stash those kinds of things in case somebody needs me to justify the fact that I took an hour off clinic to go give a talk to the interns.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's one of my practical advice pieces is save stuff. And I think you have kind of the crux or the nidus of a teaching portfolio, kind of like the nidus of a pearl, the grain of sand in the oyster has been started. So I think that's exactly right. Thank you for sharing that, Julia. Anyone else? Laura?
I have one.
Yeah.
I always think of like, I mean, it's a little bit different, I think, after COVID, but you know, having conferences back in person. And so like I've obviously would love to go to a conference in Hawaii and speak there. So I don't know if there are any conferences for me to speak to there, but I think about using it also as like an opportunity to kind of display what I've done. So maybe to be able to get an invitation to teach or do education somewhere else and
That's
increase
great. Yeah.
reach. Yeah.
No, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Laura.
Just to kind of increase reach to the things that I'm already sharing at a local level.
Yeah, that's great. So it's a body of evidence or literally a portfolio of evidence of your experience and skills as a teacher. So it's like if someone is looking for a speaker, you can show them, well, I have a teaching portfolio. These are some of the talks that I've done, for example. Any other reasons why folks think the teaching portfolio might be important? I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but if there's maybe one more thought for like why you're considering putting one together. Yeah, Helene, go for it.
I think it's also an opportunity that once it starts to get beyond a minimum, you can make an argument for why you might want funding.
Why you want what?
Money,
Oh,
funding,
money. Okay.
right? So if you have enough of a body of work that suggests you're volunteering for a lot of teaching, it might be something you can parlay into some FTE because you are spending so much of your time doing that and not just an occasional thing.
I would say in practical terms, it definitely is another form of evidence that you are doing work as a teacher, and it can be a strong part of application for additional FTE. Probably portfolio in itself in our division is not a form of like an application for more FTE to do something, but it definitely adds to the body of evidence. So I'm going to go through some of the reasons why I think it's important that we all consider having a teaching portfolio. So in the clinician scholar pathway and also in the physician scientist pathway, but particularly in the clinician scholar pathway, you need to have a teaching portfolio, and it's actually looked at as a means of evidence for promotion. So it's mandatory for some of you, potentially, if you're in the clinician scholar pathway or are thinking about it. Oh, someone in the waiting room, whom I will admit, then you have to do this. And I put here in quotes what the Department of Medicine website says about the teaching portfolio as it pertains to promotion. And you can just read that. I'm not going to read that out loud. The third bullet point is kind of what Helene was alluding to, and others as well, is that it is sometimes super, super helpful if you're interested in some sort of a leadership or administrative position that has to do with education. A candidate who applies for a position, say clerkship director or associate program director or dean of something, with a teaching portfolio that organizes their experience and their skills in teaching and in scholarship, I think is a much stronger and seriously appraised candidate than someone without one. And that's regardless of what track you're in. So if it's congruent with your identity as an educator, it could be very, very helpful to have a teaching portfolio. So those are my reasons why I think this is a, if I may say so myself, an important talk. And hopefully we'll get you started on a teaching portfolio if there's reasons why it's congruent with your identity as an educator. My poor computer is like, there's like smoke coming out of the back here. All right, here we go. So objectives for this talk, there's three major things. There's a few different narratives that you have to write yourself as part of a teaching portfolio. The executive summary and the teaching philosophy are two of them. They're both about a page long. They go in the teaching portfolio, and I'm going to try to demystify a little bit what those are and what they're about. The third one in parentheses is a self-assessment. That's another one-pager that you write. That's for promotion. That doesn't go in your teaching portfolio. But I mention it here because it's another thing that you have to compose if your teaching portfolio is for promotion in a clinician scholar track. Okay, the second objective, which Julia kind of already is doing and alluded to, is putting everything in buckets. Organize your educational work. I really want you at the end of this talk to think about all the things that you're doing as a teacher, and place them in buckets, either physically, I mean, maybe not like plastic buckets, but maybe files in your Outlook or whatever it is, but put all your teaching work in buckets. And the third objective is to realize and appreciate that it's not just putting things into buckets, but to gather evidence of excellence and accomplishment as a teacher. And so that means evaluations for talks. I think that's the big one to emphasize. And then anything else that's considered scholarly, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes as well. Educational scholarship and gathering evidence of excellence in educational scholarship. All right, so this is, I wanted to share with you all the PDF that I got when I was up for promotion to associate professor. I think this was 2015 or 16. And so it was this big, long checklist of things, and I started checking them off. All right, division head letter, letter of concurrence, letter of support, got it. Internal letters of recommendation, self-assessment, CV, IDP. And at the very bottom is teaching portfolio. I was like, oh crap, I did not remember the teaching portfolio. And it takes forever. It takes a long time. I had not done most of the things I'm advising you to do today. I had not done. And so I got to this last item on the checklist, and I was like, I got to put together this teaching portfolio. And so practical advice number one is everyone says start on it now. Everyone says start collecting your evidence, your talks, everything now, which I highly advise that you do. But if you don't do it, don't imagine that this is something you can put together in it, even in a day. I mean, it took me multiple days, evenings, weekends of work to put together a good teaching portfolio. So be aware of that. It's not something that you can say, oh, I'll just write that for that job application like a week before applications are due. So this is an email that I sent Molly, one of my colleagues, and maybe you all know Molly Jackson. She'd just gone through the process, and this is me writing to her, not the other way around. Would you be willing to share a copy of your teaching portfolio? I have a month having chest pain. I was having crushing substernal chest pain trying to put this thing together. So give yourself time, okay? And so here are the sections. Let's talk about what this thing actually looks like. It has, these are the major sections that are mandatory for a teaching portfolio: the executive summary, personal information, teaching philosophy, teaching activities and role as an educator, professional development, and then this nebulous thing called recognition. So the optional parts with the question mark are listed on the right side of the slide. Mentorship, I think you all do some mentorship, leadership, honors and awards, and long-term goals. I don't really think these should be considered optional. I mean, if you have an award, please put it in your teaching portfolio. Like, that should not be optional. Don't leave that out. I think it's important to share long-term goals. So, but I'm just highlighting the idea that when you get the handout for your teaching portfolio, it says these things are optional. So you may want to leave some of them out. Like if you don't have a leadership position, it's not a big deal. You can just leave that out. So what I'll be focusing on are what is now bolded the executive summary, teaching philosophy, and teaching activities and role as an educator. That fourth bullet point, the third one that's bolded, is the most important part, and that's the bulk of the teaching portfolio. So I'll spend some time kind of leading you through how to do that. Okay, so Department of Medicine has made this as confusing, I feel like, as possible. And you may know that I have a new role as I direct CLIMB, the Center for Learning and Innovation in Medical Education. I should know what the acronym stands for. And in that role, I'm part of the Office of Faculty Affairs, and Trish Kredick is the Vice Dean for Faculty Affairs. And she's asked me to start thinking about how we can revamp the teaching portfolio to make it more user-friendly, less of an ordeal, more practical and helpful. So I'm just kind of plugging that. If anyone becomes interested in kind of teaching portfolio 2.0, please let me know. And there's some possible opportunities to kind of work on something that'll be, I think, hugely impactful for a lot of people in our department, in our school. So anyway, these are the other parts of the teaching portfolio submission, but they're not really parts of the actual teaching portfolio. So the actual teaching portfolio is part A, and then all this other stuff is kind of added on as appendices to your teaching portfolio. All right. Any questions? I'm going to take a breath. I'm getting lightheaded from talking. I felt like I let Katie in, but did I hit the wrong button? She was in the waiting room.
She's here.
Oh, she is. Oh, it's my window. Sorry. Was not maximized. Okay, so let's keep going. As I said, there are 3 narratives in your promotion packet, and 2 of which go into your teaching portfolio. The 2 that go in your teaching portfolio are the executive summary and the teaching philosophy. So I'll spend a minute talking about these, and I hope to talk about these in a way that helps you think about what you might write for each of these yourself. So the executive summary goes at the beginning of the teaching portfolio. This is about a page where you summarize your professional life as a teacher. It's important to say good things about yourself. My teaching portfolio is online, and it's kind of embarrassing because it's very much like, I'm an innovator. I am a excellent educator. And it's like stuff that you don't actually say when you talk to someone, but it's stuff that you have to write in a document like this. So it's like trying to think of good things about yourself that you want to say. Looking for patterns or trends in your career. So it was actually pretty fun to think about my career to date as an educator and look back and think about, well, why did I make the choices I did? What were the reasons why I wanted to do this? And try to find like a pattern or a way to describe the flow to my career. And so that's kind of the third bullet point there is, can you describe a flow or a logic to the decisions you made as a teacher over the course of however many years you've been in practice? So that's the executive summary. And so this is kind of the first bit of my executive summary. You can read the first paragraph there. I think it's important to show some gratitude for being able to do what you're doing, which is why I wrote it like that. And I kind of followed one of my mentors, Chris Wong, as an example. His executive summary was very similar to this. And then I broke it down, as I said, in kind of immodest language, but not like totally crazy, I hope. These are the sections that I wanted to emphasize in my executive summary: teaching, innovation, faculty development, and then this regional national leader. I mean, if you're trying to get promoted as a clinician scholar, you can't be like, oh no, I guess, no, I'm fine. I'm not really, nobody knows me. Like, you want to find evidence that you do have some sort of a reputation regionally or nationally, and then kind of highlight that. And so that was the fourth part of my executive summary. Okay, any questions about the executive summary before I talk about the teaching philosophy? And by the way, I'm happy to look at anyone's teaching portfolio draft or any components of this and give feedback, which I do for a lot of folks. Happy to do it for you as well. All right, so the teaching philosophy piece. This is, I've noticed, a really, really hard thing to get started on without much guidance. So I'm going to provide some guidance for how you write your teaching philosophy. So start with the very basic. What do you do that's teaching? So maybe I'll open that up and you can put it in the chat or unmute. Let me pull up the chat so I can see. Oh, and there's questions too. I had not noticed the chat. So put in the chat whatever you think is teaching and be expansive. Like, don't limit yourself. What is it that you do that's teaching? Oh, and Katie, no problem. Neha, the narratives are about a page each. Yes, precepting in clinic. Put something in the chat that you think might not be teaching. So Lindsay, providing feedback on rounds. Yeah, so that's great. That's like not directly teaching, but it's giving feedback. It's teaching, right? It's still teaching. Simulation sessions, so OSCEs, that's teaching. All right, Lindsay, thank you for clarifying. Amy, random appearances, GRM, yeah, that's teaching. I mean, those are clinic sessions with learners. That's definitely teaching. Case-based discussions from Ermias on rounds, it sounds like maybe in a clinical teaching environment. Being available for questions. So now we're getting expansive. It's like availability to talk to folks about specific clinical questions. That is, I mean, I would say that's teaching. Classroom courses from Helene, Lindsay, mentoring meetings with undergrad students, residents, fellows. All right. So these are all excellent examples of teaching. And as you think of all these kinds of teaching that you do, think about what you do, how you do it, and then why do you do your teaching that way? What makes it effective? And the last bullet point here, you may not know, so I learned this from Helene. You may not know that you have guiding principles in what you do, but almost certainly you have some guiding principles that are guiding what you're doing and why you're making those choices. So spending a minute and thinking about what's the teaching I do? What do I actually do that's teaching? Why do I do it that way? You must be trying to be effective. I know you're trying to be effective as a teacher. And so what are your principles? Any questions about kind of this general framework or approach to writing a teaching philosophy?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was involved in some kind of hospitalist meeting where leadership was giving us examples of activities that are valued or not valued. And this was several years ago, so I'm kind of curious if it still holds true. Because I think what they were saying at the time was you want to do things that are on this like regional or national stage. And if you're doing things that are more kind of at home, like, you know, mentoring a medical student or answering questions from community groups or something like that, that was nice, but that wasn't really something that was valued. And I'm curious if that's still the case or not.
That is a great question, and it's a part of a much larger conversation around kind of the word value. My answer to these kind of questions always is, I think it has to do with what's authentic, what's satisfying, and what feels impactful. If being promoted to you is the priority in a clinician scholar track, and then it makes sense to prioritize your limited time to do things that will get you promoted, which does include getting a national, regional reputation. So in that sense, there's a certain logic to that kind of feedback you got that, yeah, don't give feedback to that medical student or mentor that medical student for an hour. Put a talk together to give a national talk or a regional talk so that you can say you have a national reputation when it becomes time for promotion as a clinician scholar, if that's the track you're in. I approach it differently. I do the things that I find to be satisfying and enriching and authentic. And then hopefully that, I mean, in my case, that's kind of fit also in the promotion criteria. So it's hard to say what's valuable from an external basis. I don't know. Now I'm kind of waxing philosophical about this. This really, you asked a really practical question, and I'm getting kind of philosophical about it. I think regional and national stuff has greater value for promotion in the clinician scholar track. Does that say some more about the question, Lindsay? I want to make sure I understand.
I think, oh, and I see Helene has her hand raised too, but
Oh,
I think
sorry.
I have this underlying fear that the things that I value are not what the institution values, and that I'm kind of running myself up a creek without a paddle. But I guess I'm hoping maybe there's some kind of out where I can describe what I'm doing in a way that makes it seem more impactful, even if I'm not speaking at the Congress of whatever, and maybe that will be okay, but I'm not sure if you could actually say that.
Yeah, Helene, do you have a comment?
I think they're all layered. And I think what happens is we start with the things that make sense, but what you'll find is that it is in those teachings with your med students that you begin to understand what you're teaching. And so I would say I don't think it's an either or. I think it's more of a both and, but it's like when you realize that what you're doing is actually something that is either a little bit different or a little bit over and beyond, then you might be using your students as your lab to then think about what might you learn from that teaching that you could then take again to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, if you end up doing something new with teaching a new skill that maybe hasn't been done before, can you then translate that into like a workshop that you might do at a meeting, right? So I would think about how do you take the things that feed you and think about disseminating them to multiple audiences. And then that way you keep doing the thing you love to do, but you also put yourself out there a little bit so that you can also get some of that recognition. So you might think of it more like, you're piloting something with the local folks to then put together and try to disseminate more broadly.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, and also I'll say one more thing about it. Like, I really wanted to be a college mentor, and I applied for years and like multiple years in a row, and I finally got it. But that was all about me. It's like I wanted to work with students. I like to teach physical exam. I like to do mentorship. I don't think it helped me a lot for promotion. I mean, to be honest, I was able to put it in my teaching portfolio, and I think it helped me in that sense. It's like it was congruent with my identity as a teacher, and I could talk about it, put in evaluations. But it had nothing to do with reputation at all. But I didn't really care because it's like that's what I enjoyed doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a balance of all those things.
Makes sense.
Okay, great question. Okay, examples of teaching philosophy. So these things are like a page long, and this is just like the first paragraph or the first sentence. And so this person, these are all shared with permission. I don't remember whose this is now, but you can read this. And then they went on to expand on each of these components in the remaining paragraphs of their teaching philosophy. Here's a second example, couple paragraphs. So this has to do with support and safety. And then also some introspection around self-doubt and performance anxiety. So you can see that this was someone else's approach to starting their teaching philosophy. This one's mine from 2016. So it's anchored on one core belief: teaching is most effective when focused on guiding and optimizing the behavior of learners. And then this is mine in 2021, where I say, I now find putting behavior at the core of teaching philosophy to be cold and almost nihilistic. Focusing on behavior without the context of goals, motivations, identity, lived experience, growth mindset, or coaching now feels unlikely to lead to better learning. So I wanted to show like two versions of my teaching philosophy over like 10-ish years to show that, I mean, this can evolve. It's not set in stone. They're not going to read it and say, oh, that's wrong. Like I think if anyone was judging teaching philosophies, they would probably say, oh, wrong, that's wrong. But but they want to see thoughtfulness, you know. I think if anyone is looking at your teaching portfolio for a job or for promotion, they want to at least feel like you spent some time and thought around it. And then I did a lot, honestly. And the second time around, I was like, things have changed a lot, you know, and I wrote about that. So that was kind of fun for me too. It was kind of cool to be able to do. Let's see, Helene has a comment. The philosophy also showcases some of your expertise as well as points to your potential actual scholarship opportunities. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, intertwine your scholarly work into it as well.
I just think your last slide sort of had hints of both of that, because they were talking about kind of what they were teaching and sort of where their expertise is. So you can put those two together, I guess. It's just a way to showcase sort of a double whammy.
Yeah. Okay, so let's spend a minute here with a little more typing in the chat. So what I'd invite you to do is think about the first 3 bullet points, as we kind of already did. So you're a bit primed. And now in the chat, just write down one guiding principle for the way you teach. And obviously, no right or wrong, and no one's going to hold you to this, but I'm just trying to prime you for writing something later. So just put something in the chat that's a guiding principle for you as a teacher. All right, Laura says collaborative and interactive with learners. Great, thank you, Laura. Neha, belonging and psychological safety in the learning environment. Sorry, whoever that was, I'm just fixing my window here. All right, Amy, start with asking the learner where they are and what they hope to gain. Yeah, from this time we have together, what do you want to focus on today? Lindsay says, I strive to identify my learners' internal motivation and teach in a way that harnesses their biggest interests and strengths. For Maya, setting clear learning objectives at the start. Lexi, teach to the scenario. Keeping it short is oftentimes so helpful on rounds. All right, excellent. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and your ideas. And you have started writing your teaching portfolio. Keep that sentence and you can expand on that, explain why that's an important guiding principle, and maybe there's additional guiding principles that you can write something about as well. All right. So the third narrative in the packet, this is not part of the teaching portfolio, but is part of a promotion packet. So I just wanted to put it there so you at least are aware. It's the self-assessment, and it's like a bit of reflection and goals, but that's not part of the teaching portfolio. Okay, any questions so far? So the sections I mentioned are listed here, and now we're going to talk a bit about what I said is the bulk of the teaching portfolio. That's teaching activities and role as an educator. And according to the official guidelines in the Department of Medicine website and like the PDF they have linked to teaching portfolio, the teaching activities and role as an educator includes clinical teaching and lecture. And so the key facets here are what level of learner, how much time you spend doing it. And so these are kind of mandatory things that you need to keep track of and include in that section. So I recommend, as you think about this really, really broad concept of teaching activities and role as an educator, and I think this is partially because this is how I think. It's like I gotta compartmentalize and break things down. Otherwise, I'm gonna miss stuff and I'm not gonna know what goes where. So this is how I broke down this section. I do not believe this is official guidance. The official guidance was here, but this is the way I break it down, and it includes what they recommended that we include in the official guidance. So it's direct teaching, and that's broken down by level of learner, curriculum development, broken down again, and then educational scholarship. And I tried to break it down into, in hindsight, what are the areas of educational scholarship that I've done. This can be different. I mean, this will be different for everybody. I can imagine Laura's might include teaching activities on clinical service. You don't want to be totally, I wouldn't, for example, what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't put doing a medicine consult on a surgery service as a teaching activity. But beyond that, if there's like a talk I give to the surgery residents about medicine consult, then that becomes a teaching activity. So we want to be really broad, but we can't really overlap with our clinical work completely. Okay, so here's practical advice number 2. Everything that you do, put it in a bucket as you do it, no matter what it is, anything that's considered teaching. The teaching portfolio is super, super flexible. It's unlike your CV. Your CV is very rigid and everything's got to be in a certain way, and they don't want to see anything more than what they ask for. A teaching portfolio, they tell you what they want, but beyond that, you can be really flexible in how you organize it. So here are my buckets, as I was alluding to earlier. Under direct teaching, medical student education, and then I further split it, internal medicine clerkship teaching, and then I split that by year to be as comprehensive as I can. Special teaching activities within the clerkship, I made this up. I was like, how do I describe this thing I did? Well, I'm going to call it a special teaching activity within a clerkship. And so there's a couple projects that I did when I was at UCSF. And so those are listed there. Advanced 4th year elective. So these are things I was involved with. Again, this is all UCSF stuff, but that's how I broke it down. And then I did some OSCE related stuff at UCSF and here. So obviously yours is going to be much different. Everyone made different choices and are doing different things. But based on the choices I made and the opportunities I had, this was a logical way to break down the medical student education that I do. Sometimes buckets will overlap. Like what if you did a project around something that had to do with OSCE teaching, like for example, I did. So you just say that. You don't duplicate everything in each section of your teaching portfolio, but you can refer to a different section of your teaching portfolio. So under direct teaching, medical student education, OSCE related teaching and leadership, I had that position for a couple of years, and I said, I did this project, please see below under educational scholarship. So my point here, what is the main point here? 2 main points. Include everything that you did that's teaching related. Don't say, oh, it doesn't quite fit, I'm not going to include it anywhere. Include everything, but don't duplicate it. Just refer to a different place in your teaching portfolio where you talk more about it. Okay, so let's do it. Let's put some buckets in the chat. I already kind of prompted this, but now that I've talked more about buckets, just write a title for what you would call one of your teaching buckets and put it in the chat. Does that make sense? It's very similar to what I already asked, but give it a more formal or fancy title for a bucket of direct teaching. I'm going to go back to show what I mean by buckets. So these are buckets. Okay, serious illness communication simulation. Yeah, great. Thank you, Lindsay. Great example. Mentoring workshops for Diabetes Institute. Great. And these become subtitles under direct teaching. And then you're able to organize all the teaching that you do. How about a couple more? Anyone else? Clinical patient-centered teaching, pre-clinic conference, topic development. Excellent. All right. Cool. Thank you
Oh,
all.
but
Let's keep
journal
going.
club count?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Journal club is teaching.
Where would
mean-
you put that in? Would you make its own bucket of journal clubs, or would it be an activity under something else?
Depends on how you want to organize it. I would say the key thing is don't omit it. If you organized or gave a journal club, that goes in there somewhere. If it's for the residents, you might put it under resident teaching, special activities, you know, or something. I like my special teaching activities. It makes it sound very special. Julia, do you group medicine clerkship teaching per session or what, Julia, what kind of
So-
teaching do you mean?
Well, so like, right, we have med students in clinic for each will come here for a month, right? There'll be 2 of them and they rotate between each of us per day. And they might be with me 2 days a week for 2 weeks. So it's a
Mhm.
pretty sort of intense time that I spend with them, but overall, it's not a huge amount of time
Mhm.
per year. But would I say worked with 2 medical students, in this time frame, or do you just sort of say med student precepting twice yearly for 2 weeks?
Yeah, maybe the next slides here will clarify that. I think you could do it any number of ways, and I'll give you some examples of how we present the actual clinical teaching time under direct teaching. So what does it actually look like? It's what you did, how much you did, how well you did it, and then ideally some sort of evidence of improvement or impact of what you did as a teacher. And it's to summarize it. You really don't want to have every single data point, which sometimes happens. Sometimes people have like individual sheets of evaluations, which, that doesn't go in a teaching portfolio. So here's one example. This is Molly's shared with her permission. So it's, you can see a brief description of what the job is that she did, the content and the quality of what she did, the content and quantity followed by the quality, and then evaluation data. She summarized everything between 2009, 2015 in this single table. So that's one way you can do it. No one said you can't do it like that. This is how I did it. I started with a summary here. So this is kind of like my summary section at the top. And then I broke it down by year. So this is all my internal medicine ward attending, broken down by year. I included a lot of comments because, well, honestly, it feels good to include the positive comments. And my scores weren't that great to start. And so I wanted to show that, maybe the scores weren't that great, but I was trying and I got some positive comments. So that's how I broke mine down. This is Andy Lux, also shared with permission. He runs the respiratory course, or I'm not sure what it's called now, but he graphed their scores and how they improved, not only how they improved, but how they compared to the other courses as well. So this is evidence of improvement and impact and quality. So this is another way you could do it if you chose to. Including this kind of a chart in my teaching portfolio kind of blew my mind, so I didn't do it, but people do it. Some people do it if you wanted to. Okay, so that leads to practical advice number 3. All of this, the value of all the stuff we've talked about so far is highly diminished without evaluations, some evidence of impact or quality. So get the evaluation, save the evaluations. Don't mean to shout, but it's really super important to do this. So let's say you give a talk, you don't hear back. Like maybe Neha's thinking she gave that faculty development talk, never gave her a letter with the evaluations. This is like a template that you can use to just ask. Basically, the advice is just ask for evaluations. Most of the stuff that you're doing for students and residents is being evaluated, but people are super busy and they forget sometimes to follow up. And it makes a big difference for you and your teaching portfolio to have these. So I really enjoyed speaking to your group. So it's not just about like, where's my letter, but it's like, I want to get better. Could you please provide the evaluations, and it'll go in my teaching portfolio. Okay. Right. So educational scholarship, I'm kind of skipping around a bit. We talked a lot about direct teaching. That's the biggest piece. But I want to talk a bit about educational scholarship and what goes into the teaching portfolio. So your CV has a list of products organized in a certain way according to what the Department of Medicine, School of Medicine wants. The teaching portfolio gives you a lot more flexibility to describe the scholarly work that you've done around education. And so what entails educational scholarship? Some things are definitely educational scholarship. Any peer-reviewed publication that has something to do with education is educational scholarship, obviously. So that's an easy one. On the other end of the spectrum, giving a talk is not scholarship. That goes under teaching. Tried something, but didn't assess it, that's not going to count as scholarship. Some folks I've noticed have said like what they're interested in doing or projects that they're interested in. That's not scholarship yet. Hopefully that becomes scholarship. But plans don't go under educational scholarship, or interests don't go under educational scholarship. In the teaching portfolio, there's a lot of stuff in this in-between territory that you can make count as educational scholarship and really enhances and enriches how you're portraying your career as an educator in the portfolio, in the teacher's portfolio. So things that are invited but aren't peer-reviewed, newsletters, books, chapters, those are scholarly work. Some like a meeting abstract, MedEd portal, which actually is peer-reviewed, so that might go under peer-reviewed as well. And then some other things that I put in orange here that are not traditional peer-reviewed PubMed listed scholarship, but they're not in the red box. Educational scholarship, anything that has to do with teaching. Can you all hear me? I got an unstable connection alert.
You froze for a minute there, but we'll assume we reread your slides 6 times while we were waiting for you to come back.
Oh dear. Okay. All right, let's keep going. And I mentioned these parts of the teaching portfolio. A is everything I've talked about. And then in the appendix goes B, C, and D. And then the E is other materials that can include handouts that you've made that are beautiful, maybe PowerPoint slides that are really well made. So again, ways to showcase your prowess and experience and quality as a teacher. And so here is practical advice number 4, is keep track of these things. And especially ones that look good, or at least you think look good. Like these are a couple of handouts that I think look really good, that I spent a lot of time on and kind of got some pictographs there made to help make my points. And so these went in the back of my teaching portfolio. A couple other handouts here. Okay, and practical advice number 5, which I think will become increasingly important in the years ahead. Make sure you know what people want. I mean, let's say you're looking at a job at Duke or something, and they're like, please include your teaching portfolio. Make sure you know what their teaching portfolio looks like. If you're writing a teaching portfolio for UW for promotion, get the latest guidelines. I got kind of burnt on this the first time when I put mine together, because I'd put everything together since I graduated residency. And then at the very last minute, when I submitted it, they said, oh, we only want stuff from your last promotion onward. And so delete everything else. And I was like, that's insane. That's like most of the stuff that I've done was, from over years, it takes years and years and years to do stuff. So that was kind of a bummer. I ended up including it anyway, but I can see where that kind of thing can trip you up. So make sure you got the latest guidelines. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes left. These were the objectives. The executive summary is a positive, immodest look back at your career to summarize what you've done as a teacher. The teaching philosophy, start with what do you do that's teaching? Why do you do it that way? And what are the guiding principles? You already shared some. Use that as your starting point. Please put everything into buckets. Organize everything. Most importantly, don't leave anything out. Anything that's you consider to be teaching is probably teaching and goes in your teaching portfolio. And finally, gather the evidence of teaching excellence and scholarship. If you didn't get an evaluation or a letter for something that you did, it's okay to ask for one. And these were the 5 bits of practical advice, which I just went over in going over the objectives. That is all I had. Thank you so much for your interest and engagement. Any questions in our remaining 3 minutes? And again, I invite anyone to reach out. You can CC Daniela, we can find a time to meet, or I'm happy to just look at your teaching portfolio or any part thereof and give you feedback. All right, great. Thanks, everyone.